Hey guys, remember Feud, Bette and Joan, episode 2, The Other Woman. I was definitely looking forward to this episode. You guys know I was very pleasantly surprised by last week's premiere, and this episode I was definitely really looking forward to. And this was another really great episode. I really did love this episode overall. Some amazing scenes in this one. I don't think it was as good as the first episode, but this episode was a little bit different than the first one because it focused a lot less on the feud between Bette and Joan and more on the man behind it all, that being, of course, Robert Aldrich. We really got a view into Aldrich's viewpoint, how much is weighing on him, what he had to do here, how he essentially kind of was the cause of the feud. But let's just get into this episode because there definitely is a lot of stuff to talk about. I really did love this one overall, and I love the way the episode starts off because we see in the episode there's this blonde girl who's a lot younger than, of course, Bette Davis or Joan Crawford, and she's just been casted as the neighborhood girl in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. She scampers up to Joan with an eager request to have her autograph for her grandmother who's loved her since she was a kid. And obviously, this really does kind of, upset Joan because Joan wants to be taken seriously as a woman. She wants to be able to act. She doesn't want to be treated like she's a vet, and that's kind of how she's being treated right now. And you can really see the rage on her face here. I mean, even though she does sign the autograph, she really is enraged about this. So she makes it clear to Aldrich that the supporting role will be hitting the cutting room floor and she wants her gone. And she's got co-star approval after all, and she wastes no time taking her case to Bette. If they don't unite, that there will be more where that one came from, basically that they have to work together. And Bette doesn't really feel she's much of a threat, though, that she's really not that great of an actress and that she's just kind of good looking. That's the only reason they casted her. But Joan then invites her to imagine how we'll all crumble if when Aldrich inevitably starts shifting the cookie, and Bette threatens to go home sick, and he then realizes he's been railroaded, and basically very quickly we see that Bette does get on board. When Bette actually threatens to go home sick, Aldrich realizes that he's essentially outnumbered and that they want her gone, so she's out the door very quickly. It's a very well done sequence. Again, it really does get into the social commentary of the show, their idea of, starism and things like that, and I thought they did a very good job with portraying that in this episode. But the real star of this episode, like I said, really has to do with sexism and things like that, which we'll get into in a little bit, but at this point, we see Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. They actually seem to be somewhat working together, and I thought it was definitely interesting to see where we saw that, and that they're actually seem to be side by side at this point. And he does end up firing the actress in that scene. Just a very good way to start off the episode. But that very quickly, that feud, that liking very quickly does go away once we get into the actual reason why this feud has started. So we then go back to 1978, where again, we still have this documentary thing going on, and I'm not gonna lie, I did think it was a little bit more present in this episode, and I think we definitely needed it a little bit more, and that's mainly because of this one very long exposition scene, but it was like necessary exposition, where she talks about how she feels that the reason for the feud wasn't really a reason, it was just chemical, but things didn't really start to boil over until the 40s, when they were both in their 40s. Basically, flashback to Joan on set, she's fighting for more meaningful parts. She wants a part that's actually good. She doesn't just want something that's a throwaway part. She wants something that actually does have meaning, and she's had up to here with the Slanterns and Shopgirl roles that have made her a star. So she really wanted, the role that she really wanted to play was Marie Curie, and laying an ultimatum on a stone-faced studio head backfires when he calls her bluff, so she signs on to Warner Brothers instead at a very deep discount, and Jack Warner only really took her on to use her as a cudgel against his problem child, Bette, who was difficult, expensive, and far too powerful. But because of that, Joan's not mad at picking up Bette's scraps. That's how she landed a major comeback and the role in Mildred Pierce, and Bette now basically having to play all of those, ridiculous women roles that Joan really wanted to steer away from. Bette is stuck playing those roles, and that's one of the reasons why they have this feud going on here. And I thought that was definitely very interesting that we get into this. It was definitely a little bit long exposition, but again, it was necessary. I like the way that was done, and I think they did a very good job with getting into that whole reason why those two were fighting. I thought that was definitely really good. But we then get the scene where Joan actually calls out Aldrich, and basically tells him that Bette is doing a solid job, basically about the script's breakfast scene, where the two co-stars agree the writing doesn't accurately capture how women actually fight. And unite against common memory, they seem to be genuinely getting along, but that's quickly changed once Aldrich ends up having this conversation with Jack, which this scene here was very well done. You can really tell how sexist Jack really is, and he really wants these two against each other. There's a very heavy-handed conversation about whiskey ages better than women, and he talks about how broads just get sour, and basically he's going to give the movie a wide release because the scenes between those two are really electric, but to sell tickets they'll need more buzz, and he encourages Bob to keep them fighting, and if he pulls it off he can have the career of his wildest dreams. So essentially Aldrich kind of feels like this is beneficial towards him. He'll be able to have a good career, he'll be able to make a good movie, and as we know, he doesn't want to go back to TV. TV is the thing that's dominating everything right now, and he doesn't want to go back there. So he kind of is outnumbered to kind of just make it that way, and that's exactly what he essentially decides to do. He basically decides that he is going to listen to Warner. He is just going to keep them fighting, and, he really, like I said, is kind of outnumbered here. So he reluctantly leaks a drama-stirred billing item to Hedda Hopper, and something I didn't talk about with Hedda Hopper last week. So Aldrich agrees, and he tells his wife that stoking the bad blood between his leading ladies is totally okay because he'll be there to hold it all together. He'll be the mediator in it all. And she's not really a fan of this plan, obviously, saying it's very manipulative and cruel, and says that even though he's not man enough to satisfy two women. And basically she calls him out for his strudel on the side. Basically we realize that he has been having sex with, he's been having an affair with like a ton of actresses, and she's used to it at this point. So their relationship really is not great, as we can tell, which it is kind of sad, but I like they really did dive deeper into Aldrich's relationship and really showed what he's going through. So he takes a power lunch with Hedda Hopper, who I like what they do with Hedda Hopper in this episode, because I didn't talk about before. Back in the 1960s, almost all gossip columnists were gone at this point. They didn't want to report about it. Hedda Hopper was really the only gossip columnist around to really give an accurate account of what was going on and really try to stir up drama. So he's trying to make peace with her, but Hedda, mistress of subtlety, impugns his masculine ego until he coughs up a delicious little nugget of a blind item. Basically, they talk about how Joan's tits are like too perky. She's apparently been wearing false ones on set, which offends Betty's artistic sensibilities and makes her feel she'll chip a tooth on those granted on them in the beach scene. And Hedda is very giddy about it and actually very much is into the idea. So that's essentially what they decide to do. He looks like he kind of wants to throw up, which he probably should. And basically that's what decides to happen here. So Joan Crawford is obviously very upset about this, and she keeps going on about how Betty's is very fake as well, how she has fake tits, but Aldrich tells her that this is really the only opinion that really matters, and to not listen to the bad press, just listen to his opinion because that's the one that matters. So, and he encourages her to channel her rage into her performance, which is a good idea, but again, it's kind of sexist. So she ends up calling Luella Parsons, basically in an effort to, get under Betty's skin and kind of show what she thinks of her, and she talks about how Betty looks old enough to be her mother, and Betty then arrives in the set in a fury, excoriating Joan for her movie star bullshit, and warning her she'll steal baby Jane right out from under her. So we can really tell why these two are against each other. This was all because of that conversation that Warner had with Aldrich that, again, he was kind of just outnumbered for. He really couldn't say no. It was really his word. And, yeah, he could have said no. He feels he couldn't have said no, but really when it comes down to it, yes, he could have easily said no. He could have easily not taken that deal, but he decided to, and basically, there really wasn't anything he could have done because he already said yes, and now it's just kind of too late. Even though he kind of wants to do something, like I said, it's just kind of too late for him to do that. So Warner is very happy about this. We can see he's dying over the dallies about the pure naked rancor and how much he loves it and things like that. So he really loves what he's seeing here. He's really eating everything up, and it's not that acting that impressed him, but the sense that they can feel the hatred steaming off the screen. He doesn't really care that much about the acting, and he encourages Aldrich to convince each actress that he prefers the other, a suggestion that's about to get a lot more complicated to execute, as we quickly see once we get into a scene with him and Bette Davis. So we then get this fantastic scene between Bette Davis and Aldrich, and this scene for me really, these scenes really were the highlights of the episode. I like this relationship that these two have, and it's not really anything out of the blue. In fact, there were many articles that suggested that these two had some sort of a relationship, and I'll get into that at the end of the review, but basically they ended up meeting up over the weekend. Bette is very hesitant because she kind of feels like she should make peace with Joan, but of course Aldrich has been told not to do that, so he tells her specifically, don't do that, and she comes to rehearse her character's song of I've Written a Letter to Daddy. That's like the signature song from whatever happened to Baby Jane, and she's very worried she can't properly restrain herself opposite Joan. She says she just wants to smother her with her performance, and she asks Aldrich not to let her look ridiculous, and as she practices the song, he stands behind her. He's laying his hands on her arms. They perform the choreography together, and it's weirdly intimate, but you can really tell there's really good chemistry here. Like, these are two very tortured souls who really do need each other in this sense, and Joan notices how close these two really are, what's really going on there. So she comes at this fake midnight emergency. She invites him over and calls him out on it and asks him how long that he's been sleeping with her. And basically she says that if that's how it is, she's going to quit the picture. And basically she just needs to know she's number one again in his heart. So she gets neither. But the show then goes on, and things really don't go well for Joan, as we see. So Bob comes over, and she heard rumors about them and accuses him of, cavorting with her co-star. She tries very, very hard to seduce him herself, as she apparently did when they worked on Autumn Leaves together. Remember, Aldrich has engaged in sexual contact with his co-stars before, as we've seen, with what his wife was telling him, that clearly these two have had, they don't really have a great marriage because he constantly ends up fucking his co-stars. That's nothing, that's very common for him to do. So she demands that he rehearse with her, take her through a love scene, and he says that he'll pass. He's really not into the idea at all to do that. And Hopper then marches past Mamacita at the front door to confront Joan about her exclusive with that incontinent cow, Luella, swearing she'll publish a long stash column about the actress's affairs. But Joan calms Hedda down, appeals to her off the record as a friend. We find out she's broke, $2 million in debt. Remember, we know that from last week that she's actually broke. And a single mother with 3 children still in school. All she wants is a few more years of stardom. That's really all she wants. She really doesn't have much else. She has 3 children who kind of resent her. She's broke $2 million in debt, which if you see Mother Dearest, you know why they very much do resent her. And basically, she's more than game to help Joan win another Oscar, and she says her opinion's the only one that really matters, which, remember, that's the same line that Aldrich says to her. His opinion's the only one that matters. And today she's wearing necklaces, one of which combines 4 strands of pearls, and Bette then, and basically you can see that she really does want to help Joan, but you don't know how long this is going to last, and I like this team up that they have, but how long is this really going to last, we'll have to see. So speaking of Joan, there's this other thing going on with her and this guy Peter, who I really like the way they played this, because as we know, Joan is very much into acting, but she's also very much into the whole close-up and things like that, and we met this guy last week, and I love that they didn't reveal his name was Peter till after he ended up leaving her, and that he basically, was left unnoticed, and she goes to him, and he just breaks up with her anyway, even though he wasn't going to. She breaks up with him. She doesn't really want anything to do with him. She kind of wants him out of the picture, because again, she wants to focus exclusively on what's going on there, and I really did like the way that was played here, but by far the best scene in this episode for me had to do with Bette and BD. With this, Kieran and Shipka did an incredible job in the scene where BD is flirting with the crew, and Betty's quite upset, not because of the fact that her daughter is flirting with the crew, but because she used to get that affection. She used to feel like she finally, she was able to have that affection and be able to impress the crew and for them to feel she's attractive and things like that. And she can't feel that way anymore because she's just too old, and she wants to send her daughter away to Maine for the summer, but Beatty ends up unloading on her mother. And honestly, I didn't see this as an annoying daughter. I saw this as she actually did kind of have a point here where she really did. You really did understand where BD was coming from here, where she talked about how, BD gets really pissed about this. She tells her that she can't take it. Her turn is over. She's punishing her, and she can't let her do that. That, she has to kind of, realize that this is a ridiculous role, and only out of desperation for the spotlight. No one really wants her. Nobody's watching her anymore. And it's sad to see, but that's something that really Bette is going to have to realize, that she is kind of becoming irrelevant, and that she is eventually going to be, she is eventually going to fade fade out of obscurity, and that's something I think Bette is definitely worried about, but that she definitely does have that fear of. And I like that BD really did relent on her, that look, you might be hot shit then, but you're not anymore. Every star that's famous at some point does fade out of obscurity. I mean, half the actors you're gonna see in this video, that are popular now, in 5 years you're probably not gonna hear about them again. That's just kind of how Hollywood works, and that's something that Bette is absolutely terrified of. And that she's only doing because she can't live without being in the spotlights, and she says she'll go gladly anything to get away from her and her sadness. And just the entire scene was really well done. I really did love the way that was handled, and you can really understand where BD was coming from there. Again, it really could have come across as very heavy-handed, but you really did understand that BD, her entire life, she's seen her mother been this star and get all this affection, and BD is finally kind of getting a chance to get some of her own. And the only reason that Bette wants her gone is because she can't get that affection anymore. It's very sad to see, but very well does nicely complement the ending of this episode, where Bette, after being, called out by BD and the scolding and things like that, she really just does want a friend. So she ends up calling Aldrich, and she's very tearful. He drives over to comfort her, assuring her that BD's just a teenager and that she really shouldn't worry about her. And she quotes from what was probably the worst part of All About Eve, her character's speech about climbing up the career ladder and forgetting what it really means to be a woman. And he's one of the only people who sees her as that. And he comes closer, and they end up kissing. And it's not supposed to be a manipulative thing. This isn't her trying to be a seduction attempt. She genuinely just wants a friend. And the fact that this does actually end in them having sex is kind of okay, because they're just comforting one another, and it kind of is just them, finally being able to engage in some sort of contact and not be forced to or be gawked at or something like that. This is actually them having this private moment and finally being intimate on their own terms. However, things obviously don't end well for Aldrich, because at the end of the episode, we see Aldrich, he shows up very late to his wife. He gets into bed at 6 a.m. She seems like she's asleep, but she's very much awake, knowing what Aldrich has been doing. And that is the way this episode ends. Really great stuff overall, but let's just get in this episode and what's in store for next week. So once again, this was another really fantastic episode. A lot of really great stuff going on here. Let's first talk about this thing between Bette and Aldrich, because there's quite a lot of controversy about, they probably shouldn't have done that. But honestly, this probably did happen, because there is a very famous line from Joan Crawford where she talks about, I believe it was in a memoir, where basically she talks about how there was a conversation she once had where she called Aldrich for help on whatever happened to Baby Jane, I guess for her lines or whatever, and she heard Betty's voice in the room as he was on the phone, telling him to put down the phone and not talk to her, and just to hang up, basically. So there definitely is the rumors out there and the allegations that these two definitely did engage in some sort of an affair. This isn't really too far off from what actually happened, and I like the fact the show is kind of shedding some light on that. I think it's honestly kind of a ballsy move for them to do that, and it really is humanizing these two characters. They're not perfect. They've made a lot of mistakes, especially Aldrich. He's slept with so many different actresses, and I don't think it's been just because, he's just trying to manipulate them. I think he genuinely does care about them, and he genuinely does want to get close to them, and I think him and Bette, they genuinely do have some sort of bond. They genuinely do want to be close to each other, and I really do like the bond these two have. Susan Sarandon and Alfred Molina worked very well in those scenes. I really do love the chemistry that these two do share together, and I'm interested in seeing, what they're going to do with that, because I definitely do like where they're overall going with Bette and Aldrich. I think things are going to very badly for Aldrich's marriage, but I definitely am interested in seeing where they're going to end up going with that whole story, because I'm definitely into that. Also, we had something going on with Betty's co-star, where there's this guy, Victor, who is quite flamboyant, and she doesn't really know if he's actually going to be a good co-star. So the question is Victor really going to be a good co-star for them? We'll have to see what ends up going there. I think that's going to be very interesting. The whole story with Joan as well. Joan is very much outnumbered at this point because he is so close to Bette. Bette is just the one that he bonds better with, and Joan is kind of being put on the wayside, and she obviously does not like that. She wants to have that closeness that Bette has with him, but she just doesn't, and she can't help but, be very annoyed about that, which is completely understandable. Obviously, she wants to have that bond with Aldrich, but she unfortunately just doesn't. She can't do anything about that. There's nothing she can do to try to be closer with Aldrich. She just simply does not have that bond with him. She kind of just has to accept that, and it's sad to see, but that's just kind of how it is. And I'm interested in seeing really what's going to happen with Joan. That scene with BD was incredible. Like I said, I think it was definitely the highlight scene in this episode because a big part of this show is the idea of being unhireable and being just irrelevant and fading out of obscurity, which is something that both Joan Crawford and Bette Davis are terrified of. They don't want to fade out of obscurity. They want to stay relevant. They want to be able to still act. That's the one thing that Joan still wants to do. It's the one good thing that's still in her life. Like she said, she's very much in debt, and relying on Hedda Hopper, I think, is a good idea. The question is, how long is Hedda Hopper really going to rely on her before she ends up turning on her just for more juicy gossip? Because it very much does seem like Hedda lives for that kind of stuff. Like, she's very much into this idea of crafting a good story and trying to craft, not an accurate story, but just an interesting story. She wants to do it as best as she can, and I'm interested in seeing how much that's actually going to help, and if she actually is going to help Joan, because I don't really know if that's going to work out the way we think it's going to. So we'll have to see the way that's going to go. I love that we saw a lot more of Jack in this episode, because we saw Jack Warner. I mean, he really is the sexist one. He's the one who created this feud. He did it just so these two women can just hate each other, and by them hating each other, that'll get the public to pick a side, and that's really what started this feud. This feud, again, it was never about hate, it was about pain. The pain that these two never did care about each other. The pain that these two never really did have a genuine moment where they impressed each other. And the pain where these two never really got to just sit down and actually realize that they could have been friends. And it's just really sad the way that's going. So I'm interested in seeing really where we're going to go with that. But this show really is doing an incredible job with camera work and really getting into the story of what really happened between Bette and Joan. And like I said, it very much impressed me. I like getting into Aldrich and getting kind of a more accurate view of what he's really going through. He has this marriage that really isn't going great for him. He has a history of sleeping with many actresses, but as much as I think some of them have been very much just for satisfaction or just, his personal needs, I think this one, he genuinely does care about Bette. I think he really does want to have a genuine relationship with her. And I don't know what ended up happening to Bette Davis and Robert Aldrich, so I don't know if these two end up in a relationship or what's going to happen there if these two did end up getting married. I honestly have no idea. But I can't wait to see what goes down there. I think it's going to be very interesting overall. And especially now we know this feud is quickly escalating. I love where this feud is really headed. It looks like next week that's when the feud's really going to start to come out. We're going to start seeing these two really against each other. And I can't wait to see the way that all goes down. But like I said, I don't think this episode was as good as last week's, mainly because of a few reasons. One, I thought a bunch of scenes, it was kind of a disjointed episode. There was a lot of stuff going on in this episode, and like I said, it did become a bit too disjointed. There's a lot of characters we don't really know a lot about. I'm not quite sure why Allison Wright is a main character. We know zero to nothing about her. Mamacita, she's great, but she's kind of just around for comedy at this point, and I really want them to get more into Allison Wright's character. I want to find out more about her, why she's really a main character. Pauline is a character, just really isn't doing much for me. The whole thing with the narration, I'm okay with it. I'm actually kind of starting to get on board with it a little bit, but I want to see more of it. Like, do more with the documentary aspect. We know Joan Blondell and Olivia de Havilland knew Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. Let's try to connect this to what's actually going on. Let's try to get them to actually, be present in the story, and I don't think they're doing that nearly enough, and I just don't think they're focusing enough on what they should be. And the one other thing that really is pissing me off is this is supposed to be the making of whatever happened to Baby Jane, but personally, I don't think we're seeing enough of them making the movie. I just want to see more of it, honestly. I think we're getting a very good look into who these people were as people, but I don't think we're seeing enough of them making this movie and them really going through that process. And it looks like next week we are going to get into that. I understand this week we were kind of limited because it was from Aldrich's point of view and how he saw things, but it looks like next week we are going to get more into that relationship, what they were on sets, what shooting the film was like, and that's what I really do want to see. I want to see them go through that process of making it, and I really do hope that we do get to a very genuine account of, that's something that People vs. OJ did very well. You felt like you're watching a courtroom show. We saw enough of the case. I want to see enough of them making the movie, and I hope we do get enough of that in the show. But overall, guys, I definitely really did love this episode. I really am loving where the show's going so far. It's impressing me so much more than I thought it would be, and I am overall going to give Feud, Bette and Joan, Episode 2, The Other Woman, a 4.5 out of 5 or an A-. So far, guys, this episode of Feud, Bette and Joan. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode overall. Loved your thoughts on it, and we'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for Bates Motel, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.